Good afternoon, everybody. It's just about 4:30, so I think it's time that we got started. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on data analysis in Excel. As always, I've done a few sound checks in the 30 minutes leading up to this session, so I'm confident that everybody can hear me loud and clear and can see the PowerPoint presentation that we have on the screen. I hope you're well from wherever you're joining us from today. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm in London in the UK, and I always do like to ask people at the start of the session where they're calling in from. So if you have the chat panel open, you just let me know, because I'm always very interested. We seem to have a real mix. We've got a couple from the UK, Canada, California, lots of Americans. Hello, my American friends. How are you all today? Puerto Rico, lucky you. Wow, all over the place. Amazing. Thanks so much, guys. If this is your 20th webinar with me, or if this is your first, I will just very briefly introduce myself. If my slide will move on, there we go. My name's Deborah Ashby, and I'm an IT trainer and a subject matter expert for Microsoft products. And I run these webinars about weekly now. I've gone up from bi-weekly to weekly. And I run them on behalf of Filtered, Excel with Business, and Skillsology. So if you're joining us today from one of those sites, welcome. I've been an IT trainer for quite a long time now, about 10 or 11 years, and I've been in and around the IT industry for about 24 years in various different guises at various different companies, both here and in Australia. So as I always like to say, hopefully that qualifies me to be sitting in front of you today. And we have quite an exciting webinar for you today on data analysis, something we could probably all be better at, even myself. And just to answer a couple of questions that I always get right at the very beginning, people always ask, is this being recorded? Yes, it is. And as I say every week, what we do with the recording is we upload it to our YouTube channel, and I will give you the link to that at the end, so you can go back after the session and just review anything that we've gone through. Also, if you did register for this webinar, and I'm assuming you did because you're here, you will receive that link to this specific video on YouTube, and you'll also receive the file that I'm working with today so that you can follow along and have a little practice in your own time. So hopefully that suits everybody. All right, so let's deal with the question first of all as to what is data analysis. Well, if I pull up the agenda, this is what we're going to go through. So I'll give you a brief explanation of what it is if you're not entirely sure, because I am aware that we do have a lot of different skill levels today. And then we're going to go through some of the basic things in relation to data analysis. And some of these things I have done on webinars in the past. And again, if you want to go back and review those, you'll have access to our YouTube channel at the end. But it's always worth having a little recap because they are really important features of data analysis. So we're going to do a little bit about cleaning data. And I've dedicated a whole webinar to cleaning data in the past. It's such a huge topic with so many things that we could cover. And just bearing in mind that we've probably got a lot of people on the call today who have attended our webinars in the past, I have tried to mix it up a little bit and cover a few things that I don't normally cover. We're then going to jump into working with tables, a really important thing in data analysis. We're going to look at some sorting, some filtering, and then, of course, everybody's favorite tool, what I consider to be the most important tool when it comes to analyzing your data, pivot tables and pivot charts. Now, maybe pivot tables strikes fear into your heart, and I'm just here to tell you that it shouldn't. I find them fun. I think they're really fun, but maybe I'm alone in that. I don't know. Maybe you can let me know in the chat panel if you enjoy pivot tables as well. But we are going to go through those. Such a powerful tool for analyzing data, particularly pivot charts as well. I'm just going to check that chat panel to see. See, I'm not alone. A lot of people love them, so that's good. I don't feel like such a geek now. We're then going to move into what-if analysis tools. Now, this might not be something that you've used before, but again, really, really important for analyzing data. So we're going to do a PMT function, then we're going to do some goal seek, and we're also going to take a look at something called scenarios, which you may or may not have used before. We're going to sprinkle some conditional formatting all the way through the session today, because that's also very important. And then if we have time at the end, I'm just going to run through those basic logical and lookup functions. So things like if statements, VLOOKUP. Again, I've covered those on other webinars, so you might want to look those up on YouTube. But they're so important, particularly with data analysis, and I know it is something that people struggle with. Now, I will say that this session is aimed at people who have just started in data analysis. Even if you are a little bit more advanced, I always think there's something you're going to pick up in these webinars and these demonstrations. So I'm not going to go into very, very detailed aspects of modeling and things like that. These are very basic tools, but very, very useful ones that you need to know about. And you will see the examples that I'm going to use are not specific to any particular industry. They're very simple examples, but it doesn't matter what the data is that I'm using. What matters is the technique that I'm using, because you can then take those techniques away and apply them to your own data. So don't worry too much about the actual content of the data. It's the tools and techniques you need to take away from this. So let's start by talking a little bit about what is data analysis. Well, data analysis is a process of inspecting, cleansing, transforming, and modeling data with the goal of discovering useful information, informing conclusions, and also supporting decision making. And as I said, data analysis is executed in different ways across different industries, from the very basic to the very complex, which you might find in the financial industry. And it's such an important part of today's business. It's really playing a role in making decisions and helping businesses achieve their goals. So knowing some of the basic utilities is really going to help you. So what I'm saying in short, if again my slide would move on, there we go. Data analysis is taking raw data and making it useful. And we're going to jump in straight away to some practical examples. Now, I will say that you can have the biggest and best data set in the world, but if it's messy, if it's disorganized, and if it's full of errors, the amount of effective analysis that you're going to be able to do on that data is very minimal. So such an important step of data analysis is making sure that the data that you want to analyze is in the correct format for that straight away. Okay, so we're going to start out with that subject, so cleaning data. And as I said, we do have an entire webinar dedicated entirely to cleaning data. But we are going to go through, now I'm going to show you a couple of examples. And as I said, I am trying to show you some things that I haven't shown you before, I think, from my memory. What we're going to start with is we're going to start with importing some data from an external source. And this is something that you might do reasonably frequently. The data that you're using or the data you want to analyze isn't necessarily always data that you've created yourself. It's not something that you've put into the spreadsheet. It might be something that someone sent you, or it could be something that you've downloaded from some kind of database or some kind of external system. And I'm just going to show you a very quick example. I have a little text file here, and this is a really short example. We only have about 20 or so entries. And this is a .txt, it's a text file, which is why it's open in Notepad. And this is something, it could be maybe an export of data from an HR database. So if we look at the data that we've got, it's a bit hard to read at the moment, but if we take this first line at the top here, we can see that we have somebody's name, so Juarez, Jose. We then have a semicolon, and then we have a number. Maybe I'm not quite sure what that number is at the moment. We then have a semicolon and another number, a semicolon, and then what looks to be a department, then a semicolon, and then what looks to be a job title. And that's kind of repeated for each employee in this database. And this might be that maybe I've done a download from an HR database and it's exported it out into some kind of text file like this one. And that's a fairly common occurrence, exporting to text files. So we're now in a situation where we have this text file here, but we want to get that into Excel and we want to sort it out so that everything's nicely aligned into columns and everything looks good before we start to do some analysis on it. And as I said, we only have 20 records here, but imagine doing the same thing if this file was a lot bigger. Maybe we've got 1,000, 2,000 records. Same technique that I'm going to use on this small data set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to get this text file into Excel and then show you some techniques for just kind of making this data look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to close that for the time being. And it's super simple to get files like this into Excel. All you basically do is open them from within Excel. So I'm going to go to File and I'm going to go down to Open. And you could go and you could browse for whichever file it is that you're looking for. Now, I have mine just here. So it's this one here, import text1.txt. And it's just in my recent list because I was playing around with it earlier on. So it's showing just there. But remember, you could browse to wherever you have it saved. And I'm just going to double click as if I was opening any normal Excel file. Now the difference here is that I get a text import wizard. So Excel's recognized that this isn't an Excel file, it is in fact a text file. And it's giving me some options. So this is the import wizard and it will guide you through the process of importing this file. Now the first decision I have to make is I have to tell Excel how my data is divided up. And I have two options, delimited or fixed width. And it's selected delimited for me. And if we look at what that description says, it says characters such as commas or tabs separate each field. So this is where you have to have a look at your data and see what is separating each field. And you'll see that in a preview window at the bottom down here. So I can look at my data here and I can say, okay, so we've got the name and then we have a semicolon and then the next field, a semicolon, then the next field. So the semicolon is what divides each of my fields, okay? And that pretty much is what fits with this delimited description. Characters such as a comma or tab separate each field. So I'm going to stick with delimited and I'm going to click on next. So now Excel is asking me, okay, what is separating your columns? And it's selected a comma, which isn't correct. And in the data preview window at the bottom, it's showing me how it's currently going to split that data up if I was to click finish on this wizard. Now this isn't quite right. I want to tell Excel that a semicolon separates all of my fields. So I can very simply take the tick out of comma and choose semicolon. And again, if you look down in the preview window, I have all of that data separated into columns, which is really nice. Now, you might be thinking, well, you know, that example is pretty easy that you had a semicolon in between each. What if I have some other kind of character? Well, that is where you have this other option just here. So if you do have something which isn't in this list separating your fields, you can put it in there. Also, if you have two, so if I had two semicolons separating my fields, I could check this box here, which says treat consecutive delimiters as one. Okay, so you have a few options in here. Now, I'm fairly happy with how that looks, so I'm going to click on next. And in this final stage, I can also choose which columns I don't want to import. So it might be the case sometimes that you don't want to import every single column. Maybe I'm not interested in this column just here. I can just click on whichever column I like, and I can select do not import column. And you'll see that when I click finish, it imports my data, but it hasn't imported that column. So now I'm going to do a little bit of tidying up on this data. I'm going to highlight my columns and I'm going to double click my mouse just to make those columns a little bit wider. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks, but there are a few things that I want to do with it. Now, everything currently is in uppercase, and I don't particularly want it in uppercase. I want to have it in lowercase. So I can then go in and start to use some text functions to help me tidy up my data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort out this column here first of all. So where we have the name. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert what I call a working column, and you'll have quite a few of these in your data when you start cleaning it up. They're the columns you use to kind of tidy up other columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function called proper. And what proper does, it's part of the text functions family. and it will change all of the case of whichever text I select to proper case. So it will capitalize the first letter of each word only. So I'm going to say proper, open bracket, and you can see underneath it's asking me for the text, which is A1, and close my bracket. A very simple function, but very effective all the same. And once I've done it on one, I can double click on the autofill handle in the bottom right hand corner just to copy that all the way down. And you can see how nicely that sorted that out. So what I can do then is, you might think that I can then go in and delete this column, but I'm going to have a problem. The reason why I'm getting this error, and if I undo, is because in column B, I now have a formula or a function that refers to this column. So if I delete this column, the function doesn't know what to do. Okay, so how do we get around that? Well, there's a couple of things you could do. Some people like to just hide the column they don't want. So I could right click and select hide. And that works perfectly well. If you really don't want it there, so if I undo, what you can do is you can just copy and paste this column over this one. So if I highlight the column, right click and select copy, what I can then do is highlight column A, and I'm going to paste it over the top, but I'm going to do a paste special. So up on the home ribbon, in the lower half of the paste button, you'll see I have lots of different paste options, and we have one heading called paste values. And if I paste that, what it does is it pastes just what you can see. It throws away those underlying formulas. So now when I click on any of these, you can see here, there's no formula there, okay? Nothing there. So I can then go in and delete this column, and everything will be okay. All right, so a couple of different ways that you can deal with that. Now, something else I like to do, and this is probably my favorite thing in Excel. Everybody knows I love this little feature. This feature was introduced in 2013, I believe. So if you have Excel 2013, 2016, or 2019, you're going to have this feature. And it's such a great way of being able to split columns even further. So imagine I want to split column A into first name and last name. Now, you could do a reasonably complicated concatenate function in order to do that, but the easiest way, again, if I insert a column, if I want this column to say everybody's first name only, what I can do is type the first one in, oops, Jose. And then if I go up to the data ribbon, you'll see in the data tools group, we have a flash fill button, and the shortcut key for that is Control E. And watch what happens when I click flash fill. Amazing, takes away so much work. You could use flash fill on lots and lots of different pieces of data, and it works so well. I'm going to show you that for the surname, because I'm going to do it a slightly different way, just to show you an alternative. This time I'm going to type in the surname, so Juarez. Now this time, instead of clicking flash fill, what I can do is I can start to type the second surname. And can you see what it does? Excel ghost fills it down. And if I hit enter, it fills them all down. It's still flash fill that it's using, it's just a slightly different way of doing it. So you have two options there that you could use. And then if I wanted to, I could go in and I could further delete that column. So a couple of little techniques there for tidying up some data. Now I'm just going to add a heading to this just to make things nice. So I'm going to say first name, last name. This is going to be the salary. I'm going to have department and job title. Oops, job title. And I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting there just to make those bold so they stand out. So what else would I want to do on this data? Well, I might want to change this to currency format. So I'm going to go up to my formatting up here and just change that to currency. And these two columns here are still in capital letters. So again, I might want to go through and just apply that proper command that we did in that first column. So I won't show you that again, but you could very well do that. A couple of other things I might want to do. I might want to remove any abbreviations that we have in this data. So if we look at column D again, you can see that most of the departments, engineering, sales, accounts, they're fine, but I also have things like admin, MKTG, R&D. Now I might want to make those say research and development, marketing, and administration. And we can just do a very simple find and replace for that. So again, on the home ribbon, right at the end, we have replace, and I'll just do one of them. So in case you're not sure how this works, so I'm going to say find admin and replace it with administration. And I'm going to click replace all. And it says we've made 4 replacements. And when I look, I can see now that that's been replaced. So I could go through and do replacements for the others as well. So a few techniques there that you may not have been aware of. Is everybody happy with that so far? I know there's some questions coming in, which I'll get to at the end. Everybody happy? Yes. Do we like flash fill? Because I love that. I know, it's amazing, isn't it? I know, I love it. So really useful, not just in data analysis, just in general for working within Excel. All right, so there we've gone from taking a slightly messy text file, importing it into Excel, sorting it out, making it look a little bit nicer. And there's a few other things that you can do. And when I send you this practice file, I would recommend that you go in and you change all these to proper case as well. Lovely. Let me close that down because there are a couple of other techniques that I want to show you. Now, when we did the import, that was essentially that text to columns wizard. Now, I just want to show you briefly how that works on a very simple example when you're not importing it. So when you already have the data in Excel, how do we split that up using that wizard? Well, I have some data here, just some addresses, and I'm going to highlight it. And what I want to do is I want to break this up into locality, city, and country. And currently, those are all in one cell. And I just want to break them up. So what I would do is I would just highlight my data. I'm not including the heading there. And on the data ribbon, you have a text to columns option. And if I click it, you'll see that old familiar text to columns wizard. So again, I'm going to select delimited because looking at my data, I can see this time the fields are separated by commas. So I'm going to click next. And it's picked up automatically that they're commas. I can look down in the data preview window and I can see that looks good. I'm going to click next. I'm going to leave all of the data in here. I don't want to remove any columns, but I am going to change the destination cell. So I'm just going to remove out that. And I'm going to say, I want you to put the data starting from cell B2. And I'm going to click finish. And it's going to tell me there's already data there. That's just a little warning. And it's because I have some headings up here. And I'm going to click OK. And there we go, very simple to split those up. So just a very quick example of how to do that when you already have the spreadsheet there. And one final thing on this topic of cleaning data, I'm back to my old favorite data that I always use, just because this is so useful as well, and that is the ability to remove blank rows from your data. Again, really important for data analysis. If you have blank rows or blank columns in your data, if you try to analyze that later, you're going to have all kinds of problems. So you want to make sure that you remove blank rows. Now, this data set here that I'm using is very long. If I do a control down arrow to jump right to the bottom, you can see I have 72,432 rows of data, which is a lot of data. So just to cut down how long this is going to take, I've actually just put some blank rows in here just to demonstrate this to you. And they're all in the top half, really. So I'm just going to highlight the data that I want to remove blank rows from. In a real life situation, you would highlight your entire data set. And the reason why I'm not doing that is because I have so much data, it does take a minute or so for it to do it. And I don't want to slow this webinar down, but you would highlight it all. And back to your home ribbon. And if you go across again to our good old find and select button and go to special, you'll see you have an option in here to find any blanks, and click on OK. And you'll see there it's found all of my blank rows and highlighted them. So I can very easily now go into this group here, cells, and click delete sheet rows. And there we go. So again, those are some really important techniques for cleaning up your data. Lovely. Now, one thing I do want to highlight to you, because again, this is something which I don't see people talk about too much, and it can be quite useful if you want to do something very quickly in relation to data analysis. If I do highlight all of my data set, and to do that, I'm going to do Control A, which will highlight everything. Can you see in the bottom corner down here, it's very small, we have a little icon. And if I hover over it, it says quick analysis. And again, I think this was something that came in Excel 2013. And this is a really helpful little button. If I click it, it's going to give me lots of different ways that I can analyze this data, lots of different things that I can do with this data. And it's split into groups. So it's telling me that I might want to apply some conditional formatting, or I might want to insert a chart from this data, or maybe I want to do some calculations, or maybe I want to insert a pivot table. And if I hover over any of these, it's going to give me some examples of pivot tables that I could insert based on the data that I have highlighted. So this is really, really useful. If you want to do something very quickly, the quick analysis button is a real useful little thing to have down there. Now, saying that, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to click back in my data. I'm going to highlight it again. And as I said, we're going to move on to what I consider to be the most important utility in data analysis, and that is pivot tables. Who loves a pivot table? Anybody? There's like silence. Oh, thank you, Tonya. She's like, me, I know that they are amazing. And so easy. And when I first learned Excel, I was so intimidated by pivot tables. Whenever anybody said to me, there's a training session coming up on pivot tables, I was like, oh no, when I didn't know too much about them. But now that I've used them a lot, I think they're so simple. It's just getting your head around exactly what you're doing. So let's do a quick pivot table. And I will say, I'm going to go through this reasonably quickly. Again, I'm going to give you a link at the end to our YouTube channel where we have a full, we have quite a few actually, webinars and various different tutorials on pivot tables, which will be in more detail. So I'm going to highlight all of my data. Now this is sales data for 2 fashion stores in Australia. And they're split across various different states within Australia. So this is just basically the sales data for those 2 fashion stores. So I'm going to analyze this data by putting it into a pivot table. And again, loads of different ways that you can do this, but my default method is always to go up to the insert ribbon. And you'll see the first option we have there is pivot table. Now, it's telling me, select the data that you want to analyze, and it's picked up the table that I'm currently clicked within, which is this table of data just here. Now, you could change that. So normally Excel makes the correct selection, but you could go in and just highlight to change the range if you wanted to. And I'm going to say, put the pivot table on a new worksheet and click OK. And there we go. We have a blank pivot table. Now, if you've never used them before, this may seem a little bit strange. You might think, well, where is my data? What am I looking at here? When you first create the pivot table, it will be empty. You need to add data to it in order for that pivot table to build out. So what we have here is a blank pivot table report. This is where our pivot table is going to go. And then over on the right-hand side, we have this pivot table fields area. And this is kind of where you build your pivot table from. Now what we have up here is we have all of the headings from our raw data set. So it's picked up all of those different headings. And then what we have underneath are 4 different areas. And the idea of a pivot table is that you take one of the headings and you drag it and drop it into one of these 4 areas. And as you do that, you'll see your pivot table will start to take shape. Now, how and where and why you do this is entirely up to the kind of information you're looking to extract. So maybe I'm looking to see the total sales for these chains by state. If that was my motivation, what I would do is I would go over here and I would look for the state field and I'd drag it down into rows. And you'll see when I drop it, I will get the names of all of the Australian states in the rows. Now I want to see all of the sales data for each of those states. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to grab my data, which is here under sales, and I'm going to drop it into values. Your values always go, sorry, your data or your sales data always goes into values. And very quickly, I can see now the total sales across all of those states in Australia. Now, maybe I want to see how those sales for each state are broken down by store. So I said there are 2 stores that we're looking at. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to grab store and I'm going to drop it into columns. And you can see now I have the 2 stores, Glam Rags and Style Studio. I have my states and I have the sales broken down by each of those stores. So a really good, quick way of being able to analyze that data quickly and see exactly what you need to see. Now, I'm not stuck with this model, and this is the beauty of a pivot table, and it's where the whole name comes from, pivoting. Pivoting means we can move things around freely. So I'm going to grab store and I'm going to drop it down into rows, and let's see what happens then. I'm going to put it under state. And I now have a completely different layout for my pivot table. I now have it organized by state and then by store, and I can see those totals. Maybe I want to put store up into the filters area. And what happens now is that I have my states, I have my totals, and I can now use store as kind of like a filter. So if I just want to see the data for Glam Rags, I can click OK. And I just see the data for Glam Rags. Once you do apply a filter, remember you can clear it just by selecting all up there, and that will put it all back again. So really, really nice and simple. And you can go through and you can start adding as many things as you want. I could start adding the manager to the columns if I wanted to. Now, that doesn't look the greatest because we've got loads and loads of gaps, but I have manager running across the top. I could say, oh, that doesn't look too good. Maybe I want to put them down there. And there I have it broken down by state and then by manager. You can really do with this whatever you want to do. Oops, let's click back on there again. Now, if you want to get rid of a field, you can just drag it off. Very simple, okay? Really, really great way of analyzing any data that you have. Now, a couple of things in here with pivot tables that I find useful. If, for example, we have our sum of all of our sales just here, now this should really be currency because they are sales. So what you might be tempted to do is click on one of these and go up and apply currency format in the way that you always would. I wouldn't recommend that. What I would recommend that you do instead is right click and go to value field settings. And then we have a number format option. And I'm going to change that to currency. And I'm happy to keep 2 decimal places. And there we go. We now have that formatted as currency. I could do other things. So now I've got the sum of sales here. What if I wanted to see the average sales across all of these states? Now, I don't have the average figures in my raw data. If we just jump back to our data, which was here, I have the sales, and that sum of sales is just doing various different sum calculations, but I don't have the average listed anywhere here. So what am I going to do? Well, let's go back to our pivot table. One of the beautiful things about pivot tables is that you can add into it additional information that doesn't exist in the raw data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another column that's going to give me the average of all of these sales. So I'm going to grab, I'm going to scroll through, I'm going to grab the sales option and I'm going to drag it down here again. So it's perfectly fine to have the same field twice in a group. And what I'm going to do is, you can see here currently it's the same, it's still doing a sum, but if I right click and go down to value field settings, what I can do is I can say summarize the values by average. Okay, and I might want to change the title. Instead of average of sales to, I'm just going to say average of sales and click on OK. And I could then go in and do some more formatting to that. So again, just to keep things consistent, I'm going to apply currency format like we did before. And there we go, average of sales. I could carry on doing that. I could add sales field again. I could do a min, I could do a max, I could do a count. I could add as much as I wanted to into these fields. So that's a really, really nice thing as well. Something else you might want to do is, if I wanted to find out the percentage of sales per state, again, I could right click and I could go down to summarize values, but sorry, I need to add another sales field. There we go. If I right click and go down to summarize value, sorry, show values as, I could select percentage of grand total. Okay, and that will break that up into percentages. And again, I could go in and I could change the title to percentage of grand total. So lots of different options and ways that you can manipulate your pivot table to show different pieces of data that don't necessarily exist in your original raw data. Now I'm going to get rid of these two additional columns that I just added. So I'm going to drag that one out and also drag out the average. Now, something else I want to show you with pivot tables, and that is just related to these grand totals here. Now, if you don't want the grand total, if you go up to, and I'm going to have to move the webinar bar out of the way because it's covering it, you'll see when you click in your pivot table, you have a whole new set of ribbons, pivot table tools at the top. And we have an analyze ribbon and a design ribbon. And this is where you can control all different elements of your pivot tables. And you'll see in the design ribbon at the start, you can control if you want to see the subtotals and the grand totals. So currently I am showing the grand total, but I could turn that off for rows and columns if I wanted to and completely get rid of that. Okay, you could do the same for subtotals. Now, I don't have mine organized in a way where subtotals are necessary, but depending on what configuration you have here, it might automatically show subtotals, so you can turn those off from here as well. And you have all the regular formatting that you would expect. You can change the colors of your pivot tables. And if we go back to analyze, there's lots of different things you can do in here. And one of them is creating a pivot chart, which is what we're going to do very, very quickly just now. So I'm going to click in my data and I'm going to click pivot charts. And this just brings up my chart options, and I can choose any one of these. And I'm just going to stick with the recommended one, which is the clustered column chart. And I'm going to click OK. And with this chart, I can customize literally every element on this chart, from the text that I'm seeing to the colors to the legend. I can pretty much do whatever I like. Now, the first thing I can see here is that I don't particularly need this legend. It just says total, and I think it's fairly obvious what this chart is showing without the need for the legend to be there taking up space. Now, the legend is just a text box, so you can click on it and just delete. Alternatively, if you click on your chart, you'll see you have these little options which pop out to the side, and you can control all of your chart elements from here. So if I was to go to legend and click the little arrow, I could choose to move that if I wanted to, and I could choose to turn that off just by removing the tick like so. I might decide to give my chart a name. So again, just a text box, which I can edit. So I'm going to say sales by state, and I can move that around to wherever I want it to be. Now, something else that you have on a chart, and these always pop up automatically, you have these little filter buttons, these little grey buttons. So you can filter directly on the chart. So again, if I wanted to see just the date of the glam rags, I can click on OK, and it updates the chart, and it also updates the data in my pivot table. So that's a nice way of being able to filter your data. But if for some reason you don't want those buttons there, you can right-click and select Hide All Field Buttons on Charts, and that gives you a little bit more room. And of course, you can go through and use the pivot chart tools at the top. So we have an Analyze ribbon, a Design ribbon, and a Format ribbon up here. So you can really go to town on the kind of customizations that you're making. So I might want to change the color. I might want to make it quite dramatic. Entirely up to you what you do. But pivot tables and pivot charts, such powerful tools when you're analyzing data. Now, something I will show you, because I think this is always very useful, is what happens when you update data. What happens to your pivot table and your pivot charts? So let's do that. Let's go back to our data. And I'm going to jump down to the bottom, control down arrow. Now, as I said, with this data, if you have it in a table, then it makes updating things very, very simple. And I don't think I put this in a table at the beginning. That's a bit annoying. Let me do that now. I'm going to do Control A. And I'm going to give this table of data a name. So in the name box, I'm going to type in sales underscore data. That's the name of my data. I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit because I didn't name this. I'm just going to get rid of my pivot table and pivot charts, and we're going to create them again. Fortunately, it is a very quick process. Just going to very quickly recreate a pivot table. So I'm going to go to Insert, Pivot Table, and I'm going to put my pivot table on a new worksheet as we did before. I'm just going to set it up exactly how we had it before. So state down into rows and my sales data just here. And let's create a very quick pivot chart. So this is a nice little recap for you, actually. There we go. Let's drag that handle out. Now, the reason why it's important to put your data into a table and why I kind of backtracked and did that is because this is extremely important when it comes up to updating your data. If you have your data in a table, then you can just very quickly add in and everything will update automatically. And again, have I done that correctly? I'm losing track here. Yeah, no, that should work because it's called sales data. That's fine, I believe. Yes. All right, let me jump down to the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the August sales figures. So my sales figures currently run up until the end of, or the beginning, I should say, of July. And what I have over here are the sales figures for August, shall we say. So I'm going to just highlight this data and I'm going to Control C to copy it. And I'm going to jump back to my spreadsheet. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste those in by doing a Control V. And I'm going to remove that heading column. Now, what technically should happen here is it should become part of this original data. Again, I just named the range. I didn't actually put it in a table, so I'm not 100% sure this is going to work. We might have to backtrack again, guys. I'm losing my mind today, apparently. Let's go back to our pivot table and pivot charts. Now, what you should be able to do is once you've got that updated data in your table, you should be able to come back to your pivot table, click the Analyze ribbon and click the refresh button. Let's see if this works, because all I did was name the range. I didn't actually put it in a table. Let's see. Did that update? Did anybody see that update? Let me go back. I don't think it did it? No. Let me backtrack again. Sorry about that. I'm actually losing my mind today. Let's go back to our original data. Now, I just named the data, I named the range. What I actually need to do is put it into a table. So let's do Control A again, format as table, and put it into a table. There we go. And it's still called sales data because it's the exact same range that I'm selecting. That's better. All right, let's go back to our updated extra data. And I do see something that I need to change in here, and that is this date format. So again, this is another important part of cleaning data, is to make sure that your data is consistent. So currently, I can see that my month column is formatted incorrectly. If I look up here, I can see that I just have general formatting applied. I need to make sure that I have the short date applied. Okay, so now I'm going to highlight that data and copy it. And this should work a little bit better this time. If I do Control down and go to the end of this table and paste that data, and again, I'm just going to get rid of that heading row. You should see now that it's become part of that table, which is what I was aiming for in the first place. You can see that it's taken on the same format as this table. So now, because it's all within the same table, and the, if I jump back to here, the pivot table and the pivot chart are both built off of that data, then I should be able to come in here, click Analyze, and do refresh. And again, I'm not sure if I'm going to have to update. There we go. And now that data has updated. All right, so I know I made that look way longer than it should be. Going a bit mad today. So just to recap, put your data in a table, and then when you add new data to it, it automatically becomes part of the table, and you can just go back and click that refresh button. So if you have lots and lots of tables and charts hanging off that data, they will all update. So essentially it's a one-click process for updating everything. Absolutely amazing. Right, moving on. Let's go to conditional formatting, because who doesn't love a little bit of conditional formatting? Now, you've probably come across conditional formatting in various different forms, and again, I'm just going to show you some very basic things. Hopefully, most of us are fairly familiar with things like highlight cells rules. So this is where we go in and we highlight cells, and I'll just show you here if I highlight a column. If I go to conditional formatting, I can do basic things like, say, highlight all of the cells that are greater than a specific number. So I might choose to put in here that are greater than, what have we got here? Greater than 150. And I'm choosing to highlight those with a light red fill and dark red text, like so. Another great way of really being able to pull out key data. And we have lots of those different ones. As I said, I'm not going to go through these basic ones, but we have greater than, less than, between two numbers, equal to, so on and so forth. Now, when you do set up conditional formatting, they are essentially rules. So if you click the drop down and go to Manage Rules, you'll see that that piece of conditional formatting I've set up is listed in here as a rule. So if I need to go back and make any changes to that, I click Edit Rule and I can make whatever changes I need to. I can also delete the rule if I want to, just by clicking Delete Rule, and it disappears. So nice and simple to use that. Now, one thing I do want to show you, because I get this question quite a lot actually, when people saying, can you go through and highlight in a table essentially duplicate entries? So you can see here with the name field, I'm going to highlight all of the rows where we have Rob Smith as the name, and you can see we've got him in here 3 times. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my table data. I'm going to go to conditional formatting, and I'm going to say New Rule. And again, this gives me quite a few different options in here. And the one that I'm going to use a formula to determine which cells to format. And this means you can use some kind of formula to pull out the conditional formatting that you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say equals, and I'm looking in this name column. So I'm going to select the first name there. So equals E4. Now I want this formula to highlight going downwards, so I actually don't want this to be absolute. I only want the column to be absolute as it goes down. So I'm going to say $E4 is equal to, and then in quote marks, I'm going to say Rob Smith, like so. And then I'm going to tell Excel what color I want that background fill to be. So I want you to highlight him in light green and click OK. And there we go. It's highlighted everybody or all of the entries where Rob Smith occurs. So conditional formatting is so powerful. There are so many different rules that you have in there, and I would recommend you go through and have a little play around, because that can be really useful as well when you're trying to analyze your data and pull important things out of it. Another one that I always like to use is, and I'm just going to do, and you wouldn't necessarily have this, but I'm just going to put a quick total in here, but I'm going to make an error. So I'm going to do a quick sum total, but I'm going to say sum t, which isn't a function. So I'm going to highlight my cells, and no surprises there, I get an error. Now again, if you've imported a spreadsheet, or if you have a spreadsheet of data which maybe has lots of cells with errors in that you need to resolve, a way of highlighting all of the error cells would be to use conditional formatting. So again, I could highlight all of my data, and I could go up to conditional formatting, and I could go down to new rule, and I could say format only cells that contain, and I have an option in here for errors. Okay, and again, I could select the color that I want to format them in and click OK. And there you go, you can see it's highlighted that cell because that does contain an error. All right, so lots of different uses of conditional formatting there for highlighting pieces of data. Everybody okay so far? You still with me? Hello? Yes, lovely, great, okay. Couple more things. These sessions go so quick. I wish I had 2 hours with you. You probably don't wish the same, but I do. Let's take a look at something which we're going to do this because I don't show this very often, and that is we're going to finish off with goal seek and scenarios. Again, 2 really important tools for analyzing your data and helping you make decisions. Now, you may or may not have come across the PMT function before. What the PMT function does, it allows you to work out, it's very specific, it allows you to work out repayments on a loan. And I always think this is quite useful, and the reason why I show the PMT function is because it leads quite nicely into the goal seek function, which is something you can use in data analysis. So what we have here is let's say I want to buy a car, and I need to borrow $24,000 from the bank in order to do that. And I'm going to borrow that from the bank over a period of 60 months or 5 years at a rate of 3.5%. And what I want to work out is how much I'm going to be paying per month for that loan amount. And for that, I use the PMT function, open bracket. Now, this is a fairly straightforward function. You can see the arguments underneath. We have rates. So I want to put in what the rate is. So that's the interest rate, which is this cell just here. Now, you have to bear in mind that I'm working out the monthly payments, how much I'm paying per month. And this rate is actually a yearly rate. So what I need to do is I need to divide that by 12, which will give me the interest rate per month, essentially, comma. NPER, now what that is the number of periods that I'm borrowing this money over, which is in this case 60. And again, if I had that 5 in there for 5 years, I would need to do C4 divided by 12 to get that down to months as well. Everything needs to be calculated in months. Comma, and then it's asking me for PV. That's essentially the present value, the value of the loan, which is this cell just here. Close my bracket and press enter. And it's telling me that $436.60 is what I'm going to have to pay over 60 months for a $24,000 loan. And it's showing in red because it's a negative figure. It sees it as essentially that amount of money being taken out of my bank account. So now I've got that figure there, what I might want to say is, actually, I can afford $500 a month. So if I can afford $500, I can borrow more money. So I want to know how much money I can borrow if I'm paying $500 a month. And this is where what if analysis utilities come in. So what I can do is I can jump across to the data ribbon and I can select the what if analysis drop down, and I have in there something called goal seek. And what this will do is this will allow me to do this calculation. So I'm going to say set cell C6, which is the one I currently have highlighted, to value 500, which is how much I can afford. And I want it to change the amount I can borrow, and click on OK. And it does its calculation, and I can now see that I can borrow $27,485 by paying $500 a month. So another little analysis tool that you can use. All right, finally, as I said, I never get through the amount of things that I want to show you, but I do also want to show you the scenarios what if analysis utility. So again, what we have here is, this is where we can set up 3 different scenarios. So we can analyze our data to give us 3 different outcomes, and we can quickly compare those outcomes together. So this is really, really useful. Now, the scenario that I'm going to propose to you is that this is, say, my finances, for example. I have my monthly income and I have my expenses, the amount that I spend each month on these different things. I have my total number of expenses and I have the amount of money I have left per month. And we're going to set up 3 different scenarios and see how they compare. Now, before I do this, one thing I always like to do is I like to name these ranges, and you'll see why this is important as we go through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, I'm going to hold down my control key, and I'm going to select all of these ones just here, and this one. And I'm going to go to the Formulas tab, and I can quickly set up these as named ranges by doing Create from Selection. And I'm going to say, take the name from the left column. So essentially, this 4,000 cell is going to then be named monthly income because it's in the left column. This cell here, B3, will be named rent, so on and so forth. And click on OK. All right, so you can see now when I click in cell B1, it's telling me that cell is named monthly income, that one's named rent, so on and so forth. And this becomes important in a moment. So we're going to go back to our what if analysis tools, and we're going to select scenario. Oh, you can see I was doing this earlier. Let's delete them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 3 scenarios. I want to see what my amount left or my monthly income is going to be if I get a new job, and what it's going to be if I get a promotion at my current company compared to what my expenses and my income are now. Now, the first thing you always want to do when you're dealing with scenarios is set up your original scenario, so as it is now. So I'm going to quickly click Add, and we're going to call this scenario Original. And we need to say which cells are going to change. So in my scenarios, what's possibly going to change? Well, this cell, my monthly income, might change, and also these cells just here. And I'm going to click OK. And it tells me, okay, what are the values of each of those? Well, this is the original scenario, so I'm not going to change anything here. I'm just going to click on OK. I'm now going to set up another scenario, and this is going to be promotion. So if I get a promotion at my current job, the changing cells are still going to be the same. But if I get a promotion, then my monthly income is going to go up to $4,500 a month. And because I'm getting more money per month, I'm going to spend more on going out. And click on OK. And I'm going to add one last scenario. What if I decide to get a completely new job altogether? Well, my monthly income is going to go up to 5,000, but I have further to travel with this job, so I'm going to say 300, and I'm still going to start going out more as well, so we're going to change that one to 450 and click on OK. And what that means I can now do is I can switch between these different scenarios and see how that looks. So if I get a promotion and click show, I can see what my total and amount left are going to be. If I get a new job, I can see that again. All right, so that's a really good way of being able to compare things together. Now, just one final thing, if you do want to compare all of those three scenarios together in one report, which is sometimes a bit easier to see, if you click the summary button and just do summary scenario, you can see all of those compared next to each other. So I can see the current values, I can see the original, I can see the promotion and the new job. So very quickly, I can analyze all of my data within different scenarios and see which is going to be the best scenario for me. So for me, it's going to be going for that new job. All right, so really nice and simple to compare things together. Oh my goodness, it's just gone 5:30. Our time is up. I did want to go through VLOOKUPs and if statements as well, but unfortunately we haven't had the time. Now, don't worry, we have other webinars available on those two things if you were particularly interested in them. And I will give you those details just now. And let me just pop this slide up. So if you do want to send me a quick email related to this webinar, then that is my email address. And that is our YouTube account. So if you jump onto YouTube, EWB Promos, you'll find our YouTube channel with all of our webinars. It's where we upload them to, as well as lots of other content which you might find useful. So please do subscribe, like our videos, all that good stuff that young people do. I'm not a young person, I'm quite old. I'm going to throw it over very quickly now for some questions. I can see I've got a few in the question panel. If I don't get to them, remember you can send me a quick email. Let's have a look. So Janice says, what qualifies as a text qualifier? Sorry, what's the text qualifier field, you say? Let me go back to here. If we go to text to columns, which field are you talking about? Text qualifier, text qualifier. I'm not sure where you mean, Janet. Oh, sorry, here. Again, I'm blind. Text qualifier, well, you can put anything in there. So you can treat consecutive delimiters as one. So it depends what you've got separating it. So if you had a dot or a period mark, then you could put your text qualifier in there. I think you can. Or can you edit that? No, you actually can't. Oh, sorry. No, you can't actually edit that. It only gives you three options. So you've got your quote marks and you've got your single quote marks and none, which is a bit annoying. Let's have a look. Find a replace function. Shouldn't we select the data first? Your replacement included two data fields that should have not have been changed. Yes, sorry, yeah, if you need to do find a replace, yes, selecting the data would be optimum. Let's have a look. Can you change the default formatting in pivot tables? Let me have a look. I would suspect if you can, it's going to be in the options area. And again, you might have to have a little look through here. I'm just wondering if there's anything specifically related to pivot tables. Normally, if you're doing a universal change like that and not just on the workbook or on the pivot table, you'll find it in the options over here. I'm probably not going to be able to find it as quickly as I would like, but I would have a little look through the options and see if there is anything related specifically to pivot tables. I can't think of anything on the pivot table ribbons where you can do a universal change of the font, but if anybody else knows, then you can drop that into the chat panel. Can you format the dollar numbers different in the chart from the table? So when you go through, again, let me move that panel out of the way. If we go back to our pivot table, so you're talking about the numbers here. Are you saying if you want them a different currency? Is that what you're saying? Let's have a look. If you right click, in fact, I think that's going to be controlled by what you have over here. Let's have a little look. Value field settings, number format, currency. Yeah, it's controlled by the pivot table over here. Let's have a look. Some of these questions are quite long. Janice, suggestion, click on FX to set up function formulas because Excel walks you through the initial inputs required. Yes, when it comes to formulas, it really is a matter of personal preference. So when I'm doing a formula, I've always typed it into the cell directly. Some people don't like to do that. They find clicking on the FX a little bit easier. So you could go into there for this PMT function. You get exactly the same. It's just boxes that you can put in. So you can see their rate, MPER, PV. Those are exactly the same things you get if you type in equals PMT, you get them listed underneath. Okay, so the same thing, just a different way of doing it. How you do it is entirely up to you. Let's have a look. What version of Excel is this? I'm using Excel 2019 simply because I'm currently writing a training course on Excel 2019. I would say it's pretty much exactly the same as Excel 2016 and pretty much the same as 2013 as well. There's very, very little difference between those three versions. So everything I've shown you here today, you should be able to do very easily from Excel 2013 onwards. All right, guys, we have run over. I know there's so many other questions, and again, I'm sorry I don't get to them all, but if you do want to, I'll just put my email address back up there again. If you do have a question that I didn't answer, you can email me at deborah.ashby@filtered.com. And again, do make a note of that YouTube channel and like and subscribe to our videos. That's it for this week, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I will speak to you next week. I can't remember the webinar that we're having next week, but I'm sure it's probably an Excel one again. And I will speak to you then. And have a lovely evening, everybody, or a lovely morning, wherever you are. And I will speak to you soon. Bye. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit subscribe and the bell icon to keep up to date with our latest content. Happy learning!